All right, I want to thank you all for coming. We've got the room for 2 hours, so I guess we should start. I think they want us out of here promptly at 9, and then I was thinking we could all adjourn for Chinese food. There's a good joint nearby, if we feel like it. Well, this is the big relaunch of the Libertarian Book Club's Anarchist Forum. I should give a few words as to what that is all about. People frequently get confused because of the name. The Libertarian Book Club was founded way back in 1946 by anarchist exiles from fascist Europe, mostly Jews and Italians. Back in 1946, the word libertarian had not yet been subject to a hostile takeover by the free market right, and it basically meant anti-authoritarian or anarchist. And certainly we are left-wing anarchists. We're not right-wing anarchists. So just to clear that up, we've sort of been going through an identity crisis for a long time over the name, and finally we decided to call the ongoing event, which is largely what we do, the Anarchist Forum, while the entity which organizes the event continues to be the Libertarian Book Club. We did publish books a lot back in the day. Now, in recent years, that's mostly fallen to autonomy media. But in the spirit of reviving the book club aspect of the book club, I did bring some self-published literature, one of which is a special fundraiser for the revived LBC, because we did have to pay for the space. Our leading light, Peter Lamborn Wilson, has produced this collage art in solidarity with the Egyptian Revolution, personally signed by him. He's suggesting that I sell them for $10. And in addition, I brought much more modestly priced my 2 self-published pamphlets, Tompkins Square Park, Legacy of Rebellion, about the whole history of anarchism surrounding Tompkins Square Park, going all the way back to 1811, believe it or not. Right on through the big riot of 1988, as well as Deja Vu in Peru, about the indigenous movement in Peru, which is basically, the title basically referencing the Zapatista revolt of 1994, the same sort of dynamic of indigenous resistance to free trade, re-emerging today in Peru. $5, be happy to sign them, let me know. What gave me the initial impetus to relaunch the Anarchist Forum, well, one is that Peter Lamborn Wilson had been urging me to do so. And the other is that, well, probably for many years, people have been aware that I've been doing a radio show on WBAI called the Moorish Orthodox Radio Crusade, which Peter actually founded. I inherited it from him way back in the early 1990s. And just lost it due to some rather ugly internal politics at WBAI, which perhaps we could talk about over Chinese food if people are interested. But we're going to talk about Libya tonight. There's a chair right behind the door there. Welcome aboard. Well, I'd like to say a few words, and then if we have time, we'll go around and sort of have a discussion and say what people have been thinking, because I would argue that the events which have been sweeping the Arab world since the beginning of the year are of real global importance and are real the first real serious political opening of the past 20 years, on a par with what was happening in Eastern Europe with the fall of the Soviet bloc 20 years ago. And that, I think that a lot of us who can remember back then felt that at the time that it really represented an historical opportunity, which in retrospect has largely been betrayed and turned out to just be a complete capitalist restoration. And in the case of the former Yugoslavia and elsewhere, actually saw the reemergence of fascism. So I think that with the military intervention in Libya right now, we're beginning to also see a turning point in the Arab Spring, where where things could possibly, this could be the beginning of the beginning of the reaction, so to speak. Up until now, it's been an extremely hopeful development. Ever since 9/11, we've just been in this completely dystopian world situation, which I call, GWAT versus jihad. GWAT being the global war on terrorism, and particularly, in the greater Muslim world, there's just been this dynamic of, on one hand, U.S. imperialism and its regime change agendas and its smart bombs, and on the other hand, these jihadist types who seek to impose these reactionary fundamentalist regimes, and they've got their own not so smart bombs, which are just as bloody in their effect. And there hasn't been an awful lot in between. And I've been attempting in my work at WBAI over the years to try to loan a voice to the forces, particularly in Iraq and also elsewhere in the Muslim world, which reject both of these two poles, who stand for some kind of a secular anti-imperialism. And those voices do exist, but they've been really isolated, unfortunately, including, unfortunately, by the likes of WBAI and the left and alternative media in the West in general, which has itself been caught up in this whole dystopian dynamic. Now, finally, this is beginning to change. Since the beginning of this year, starting in Tunisia, and then really spreading throughout the Arab world. There's so far been two successful revolutions, Tunisia and Egypt, but there's revolutionary movements, clear across the Arab world, even in places that we never expected it, like Oman, as well as in Iran, which is not part of the Arab world, but has been sort of subject to the same dynamic. Now, the reason that this represents something which is so hopeful, and the reason that the military intervention in Libya represents such a threat is because these revolutionary movements have been a really, really bad propaganda environment, both for the jihad and for the GWAT, both for Al-Qaeda and for U.S. imperialism. They sort of changed the channel. Up until now, from 9/11. Hey, Dave, I think we've got one chair left. From 9/11 up until the beginning of this year, the narrative, to use a word I don't like that much, in the Islamic world has been, one of Crusaders versus jihadis, and Islam versus the West, and not very much room there for secular revolutionary or anti-imperialist movements. What's now with that one event in Tunisia, which back in was in December or January, when this young kid who had been abused by the police set himself on fire, and probably had no idea that it was going to spark this whole regional wave of revolutions. The channel has been changed, so to speak, and now it's not so much a story about Crusaders versus Islam. Now, it's a story about secular revolutionary movements against these entrenched dictatorships which have been in power throughout the Arab world for generations now. So this is a very, very bad propaganda environment, both for Al-Qaeda and for U.S. imperialism. My fear is that with the military intervention now, this begins. I'm not saying this has happened yet, but it begins to sort of change the channel back to the status quo ante. Now, I don't think it's going to be so easy to put the genie back in the bottle, to use perhaps an ill-advised Oriental's metaphor. Forgive me. But nonetheless, because a lot of real progress has been made in terms of political consciousness in the region. But nonetheless, it begins at least to create a propaganda environment which is which is more a greater utility to the most reactionary forces in the region, which have up until now sort of been playing catch up. You know, I mean, Al Qaeda is definitely they've sort of there's a sense that they've dropped the torch and it's been picked up by secular, popular, progressive movements.